He gave water to a giant Apache woman. Next morning, 300 warriors surrounded his ranch. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's begin the story. On a hot, dusty morning, the small ranch of Samuel Harper lay quietly nestled between the rugged hills of the Arizona desert. The sun was already climbing high in the sky, casting long, harsh shadows over the dry land. Samuel, a simple rancher in his late 30s, was just finishing up his morning chores, the weight of solitude heavy on his shoulders. He lived alone on this isolated stretch of land, far away from the bustling towns and settlements. His life was one of routine, broken only by the occasional visit from traders or travelers. But today was different. He heard the sound of hooves in the distance, steadily growing louder as if someone or something was heading his way. He stopped, wiping the sweat from his brow and scanning the horizon. At first, he thought it might be a group of cattle rustlers or perhaps another wanderer passing through. But what he saw next froze him in place. From behind a hill emerged a woman, unlike any he had seen before. She was a giant, towering over his small house, her broad shoulders and strong build unmistakable even from a distance. She wore a simple yet rugged outfit, her long, dark hair flowing in the wind like a banner. And though she moved with the grace of a skilled warrior, there was something else in her presence, something that made the ground beneath Samuel's feet seem to tremble with an unseen force. She appeared to be struggling, each step more labored than the last. Her face, usually stoic, now bore the strain of exhaustion, and her movements seemed to betray the weight of some unseen burden. Samuel instinctively rushed forward, his concern overcoming his caution. As he neared her, he saw the source of her distress. She was injured, a deep gash across her side, blood seeping through her clothes. The wound was serious, and it was clear she had been traveling for far too long without proper care. Without thinking, Samuel led her into his cabin, offering her the water he always kept close by. His hands trembled slightly as he poured the water into a wooden cup and handed it to her. She took it without hesitation, gulping it down as if she had not tasted water in days. Samuel watched her closely, wondering who she was and how she had ended up so far from any settlement. She was not just any traveler. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, told a story of someone who had seen much, suffered much, and survived. After a long pause, she finally spoke. Her voice was low but steady, as if each word carried the weight of an unspoken history. "I am a warrior of the Apache people," she said, her gaze locking with Samuel's. "I have come from the lands far to the north, seeking refuge." Samuel nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. Though he had heard stories of the Apache people, he had never encountered one face to face. His heart raced as he processed the implications of what she was saying. But before he could say anything, she collapsed into the nearest chair, exhausted beyond measure. As she rested, Samuel moved to tend to her wound. The task was difficult, as he had no real experience with serious injuries, but he did what he could, wrapping the wound carefully with cloth and making sure she had enough water to stay hydrated. He could feel the weight of her presence, an unspoken tension filling the room, but at the same time, there was a sense of respect, of understanding. He had helped her, and for now, that was all that mattered. Little did Samuel know that this act of kindness, this simple gesture of providing water to a stranger, would set in motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. As the sun set that evening, he noticed something unusual. The once silent land around his ranch was now filled with the distant sound of hooves. The air seemed to thicken with anticipation, and Samuel's heart skipped a beat. Was it a group of riders, perhaps looking for the woman he had just helped? He stepped outside, squinting into the fading light, and saw them, hundreds of riders on horseback, their faces painted with war paint, their eyes burning with intensity. They had come for her, and now they had come for him. The sound of hooves grew louder, and Samuel Harper's heart skipped a beat as he stepped outside to face what seemed like an inevitable confrontation. He had only just helped a woman who had collapsed on his doorstep, and now, Standing in front of him were over 300 Apache warriors, their horses lined up across the barren ground. The evening sun cast long shadows, but it did little to alleviate the weight of the moment. Samuel swallowed hard and stood firm, his legs trembling slightly beneath him. The air was thick with tension, and the presence of so many warriors left him with an uneasy sense of powerlessness. Each warrior wore the traditional war paint, their eyes fierce and unwavering, and their presence sent a chill through the air. The woman he had helped, the giant Apache warrior, was still inside his cabin, resting and recovering from the wound she had sustained. But Samuel had no idea how he had found himself in this situation, nor how he was supposed to handle it. He had acted out of simple kindness, offering water to a stranger in need. Now, it seemed, the consequences of that decision were far greater than he could have imagined. He took a deep breath and slowly made his way toward the warriors, his heart pounding in his chest. The leader, a tall man with a weathered face and a commanding presence, rode forward and dismounted, his eyes locked onto Samuel's. The crowd of warriors parted, making way for him as he approached. "You helped her," the leader said, his voice low but filled with authority. "She is of great importance to my people, and you have shown honor by offering aid. For that, we come to show our gratitude." Samuel blinked, unsure of how to respond. Gratitude? He had simply given the woman water and tried to help her heal. This seemed far beyond anything he had ever done before. "I didn't mean any harm," Samuel said, his voice shaky but steady. "I just saw someone in need." The leader nodded solemnly, as if he understood the weight of Samuel's words. "Your kindness will not be forgotten," he said. "We owe you a debt that cannot be repaid." In mere words, Samuel looked around at the warriors, their silent gazes fixed on him. He could feel the weight of their collective attention, and it made him uneasy. "I didn't ask for anything in return," he said, trying to make sense of the situation. "I only wanted to help her." The leader's expression softened, and he gave a small nod. "That is why you will be honored, Samuel Harper. We are a people bound by honor and respect. You have earned both." Samuel's mind raced, trying to understand the meaning behind the words. He had heard of the Apache tribe, but he had never imagined himself in the middle of their world, caught between the stark reality of their way of life and his own simple existence. "What do you want from me?" Samuel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The leader's eyes glinted with a mixture of respect and determination. "We seek nothing from you, except that you allow us to offer you our protection. You have aided one of our own, and we will ensure that no harm comes to you or your land." Samuel could hardly believe what he was hearing. Protection? From the Apache? His thoughts swirled in confusion as the leader continued. "Your kindness has set a chain of events in motion. We have watched you, Samuel Harper, and we believe you are worthy of a bond with our people. No harm will come to you while we stand by your side." It was then that Samuel realized the true weight of what he had done. His small act of kindness had not only saved the life of an Apache warrior, but had also earned him the trust and protection of an entire tribe. He had not expected this, but it seemed that fate had intervened in ways he could not understand. The leader turned to his warriors, who had remained silent up until that moment, and nodded. "Prepare the camp," he ordered. "We will stay here for the night and make sure that Samuel Harper and his land are safe. We honor our debts." Samuel stood frozen, his mind trying to process what had just transpired. He had never imagined that his simple life as a rancher would be entangled with the Apache people. He had expected nothing in return for his kindness, but now he found himself in the midst of something much larger than himself. As the warriors began to set up camp around his ranch, Samuel felt a sense of awe and trepidation. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. His life had been changed forever by a single act of kindness. The morning after the warriors arrived, Samuel Harper stood at the edge of his land, watching as the Apache tribe made camp around his ranch. The sight was surreal. 300 warriors, each one of them capable, experienced, and armed, had surrounded his small homestead. The stillness of the desert morning was broken only by the sounds of horses neighing, fires being kindled, and warriors preparing their camp. Samuel had never felt so small. His thoughts raced as he tried to process everything that had happened since the night before. He had simply given water to a woman in need, a woman who turned out to be far more than he could have imagined. Now, He was surrounded by her people, and they were offering him their protection, a gesture that carried more weight than he ever expected. He turned back toward the cabin, where the giant Apache woman was still resting. She had barely stirred since the night before, and Samuel's mind wandered to what the future might hold. The leader of the Apache warriors, the man who had spoken to him the night before, approached Samuel's ranch house. He was tall and imposing, with a deep scar running down the side of his face that marked him as a warrior. Despite his fierce appearance, there was a sense of respect in his eyes. "You are safe here," the leader said, his voice calm, yet commanding. "We will guard this place as we would our own. No harm will come to you or your land while we remain." Samuel nodded, though a part of him still felt uncertain. He had never asked for this, never expected to find himself in the midst of an Apache tribe. But now, he found himself bound to them in ways he didn't fully understand. The leader continued, his gaze steady. "You have done more than help a single warrior. You have shown our people that there are those who still honor the old ways of respect and kindness." Samuel swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the weight of the leader's words. He had helped a wounded stranger, nothing more, but now it seemed his simple act had become something much larger. The leader stepped closer, his expression softening. "My name is Takakota. I am the chief of this tribe. We have watched you, Samuel Harper, and we know that you are a man of honor." Samuel felt his pulse quicken at the mention of honor. What had he done to earn such recognition? He had only acted out of compassion, not expecting anything in return. Takakota placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder, his touch firm and warm. "You are now bound to us, Samuel," he said. "In the eyes of my people, you are a friend, and we will protect you as such." Samuel didn't know what to say. He was overwhelmed, not only by the sudden responsibility that had been thrust upon him, but also by the genuine respect in Takakota's voice. "What do you ask of me?" Samuel managed to ask. Takakota smiled slightly. "Nothing for now. Your actions speak louder than words. We will honor your kindness, and in turn, you will have our loyalty." As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, the camp grew busier, and the warriors prepared for their next steps. Samuel, still in a daze, made his way back into the cabin. He found the giant Apache woman sitting up now, her wound dressed, and her expression one of quiet gratitude. "I owe you my life," she said softly, her voice carrying a deep sense of respect. Samuel shrugged, feeling uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would do." She shook her head, her eyes fixed on him with a level of understanding he couldn't quite grasp. "Not anyone. You acted when others would have turned away. That is the way of the true warrior." Samuel didn't respond, unsure of how to accept such words. Instead, he looked toward the warriors who stood outside, their presence a constant reminder of how much his life had changed in a single day. "You have nothing to fear," she continued, as if reading his mind. "My people will protect you, just as you protected me." Samuel nodded, feeling both a sense of relief and unease. He had done nothing to deserve this protection, and yet, here he was, bound to the Apache people in ways he couldn't yet understand. Takakota's voice echoed. In his mind, "You are now bound to us." The weight of those words pressed down on Samuel as he looked out at the horizon, wondering just how much his life would change in the coming days. What had started as a simple act of kindness had opened the door to a world far beyond his understanding, and Samuel couldn't help but feel a strange sense of fate at work. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He had earned the respect of the Apache people, and with it, a responsibility he could never have anticipated. The next few days passed in a blur for Samuel Harper. The Apache warriors who had surrounded his ranch seemed to blend into the land itself, their presence as much a part of the desert as the wind and the sun. The camp was alive with the rhythms of the Apache tribe, the crackle of fires, the sound of horses being saddled, and the steady beat of drums echoing through the night air. The warriors were patient, their focus never wavering. They watched over him, a silent but unyielding presence that made Samuel feel both protected and, at times, trapped. Samuel had spent most of his life alone, but now he found himself in the midst of a people whose customs, language, and way of life were entirely foreign to him. He wasn't sure what to make of it all. He had done nothing more than offer water to a wounded stranger, and yet he had earned their respect and protection. A single act of kindness had woven him into the fabric of their tribe, and now he was their responsibility, and they were his. It was strange to think that a simple gesture could have such far-reaching consequences. Samuel couldn't help but feel a sense of awe when he looked at the warriors who stood guard around his ranch. Their fierce eyes, their impeccable discipline, and the quiet strength they exuded made him realize that his life was no longer his own. He had been pulled into a world that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. He spent his days working on his ranch, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy, but the presence of the warriors was always there, just beyond the horizon, watching over him. The giant Apache woman he had helped, whose name was revealed to be Ayanna, had been recovering. Inside his cabin, she seemed to be getting stronger with each passing day, her movements more fluid, her expression less pained. The bond between them, though unspoken, had become something that Samuel couldn't ignore. She had saved him from a life of solitude, and now he was bound to her people in ways that he couldn't yet comprehend. One evening, as Samuel worked on the fence near his barn, Ayanna approached him. She was walking with a sense of purpose, her tall frame casting a long shadow in the setting sun. Samuel looked up from his work, wiping the sweat from his brow, and nodded at her in greeting. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, genuinely concerned. Ayanna smiled slightly, the first time he had seen her smile since they met. "Stronger," she replied, her voice steady. "I am grateful for your help, Samuel." Samuel didn't know what to say. He had never been one to seek gratitude, but he could see that Ayanna was sincere in her words. He simply nodded, acknowledging her thanks. "I did what anyone would do," he said, though the words felt hollow even as he said them. "Not everyone would have helped," she said, stepping closer. "You saved my life, Samuel, and for that, I owe you more than words can express." The weight of her words hung in the air between them, and Samuel felt a strange sense of unease. He had only given her water, had only offered a bit of kindness. And yet, here she was, speaking as though he had done something far greater. "You don't owe me anything," he said quietly, though he couldn't shake the feeling that his simple life was about to change forever. Ayanna didn't answer right away. She stood there for a moment, watching him, as if weighing her words carefully. Finally, she spoke again. "You have shown us that there are still people who honor the old ways," she said. "In return, we will protect you, Samuel Harper. You are no longer alone." Samuel's heart raced. Protect him? He had never asked for protection. He had only wanted to live a quiet life on his ranch. But now, it seemed that fate had other plans for him. The Apache tribe was not merely offering protection. They were offering him something far more profound, a place among them. It was a strange thought, one that Samuel couldn't quite accept. "Why me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ayanna's gaze softened. "Because you helped when no one else would. You are one of the few who understand the value of kindness." Samuel looked at her, trying to understand her words. It was difficult for him to grasp the full weight of what she was saying. He had simply acted out of instinct, out of a desire to help. But Ayanna's words made him realize that his actions had set something in motion, something that he couldn't undo. The following morning, as Samuel stepped out of the cabin, he found Takakota, the leader of the Apache warriors, waiting for him. The chief stood tall and imposing, his eyes calm but serious. "The time has come for you to understand your place among us, Samuel Harper," Takakota said, his voice steady. Samuel's heart pounded in his chest as he approached the chief. He had no idea what Takakota meant, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, his voice shaking slightly. Takakota smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You have been chosen, Samuel. The Apache people will stand by you, and you will stand by them." Samuel stood still, absorbing the weight of the words. Chosen. He had never thought of himself as special, never thought of himself as someone who could make a difference in the world. And yet, here he was, standing on the precipice of something much larger than himself, something that would change the course of his life forever. The following days brought a quiet tension to Samuel Harper's ranch. The Apache warriors, though respectful of his privacy, never strayed far. They were ever watchful, and their presence, while reassuring, felt like a constant reminder that his life had changed forever. Samuel found himself growing accustomed to their steady gaze, even though part of him still struggled to accept that such a simple act of kindness had turned his world upside down. He had not just helped a woman. He had unwittingly become part of something far larger than himself. Ayanna, the giant Apache woman who had sought refuge in his cabin, seemed to have fully recovered. Her movements were no longer slow and labored. Now, she walked with the same grace and strength that Samuel had first noticed in her when they met. They exchanged small conversations during the days that followed, though Samuel never quite understood the depth of her gratitude. "Your kindness is more than what words can say," she would often repeat. "You gave more than water." Samuel, for his part, didn't know how to respond. He had only given her what any decent person would have done. But in her eyes, it meant so much more. It was clear that the Apache people held their traditions and bonds deeply, and Ayanna's words were a constant reminder that Samuel's life was now intertwined with theirs. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Samuel stood outside his cabin, watching the horizon. The warriors had gathered around their campfires, their deep voices mixing with the crackling of the flames. He had grown accustomed to the sounds of the tribe, though he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still an outsider. Takakota, the chief, approached him then. The tall, weathered man's face was unreadable, but his presence exuded authority. "It is time," Takakota said simply. Samuel turned to face him, unsure of what he meant. "Time for what?" Samuel asked, his voice betraying his uncertainty. Takakota's expression softened, though it was a look of respect. "Time for you to understand your place," he said, his voice steady. "You have helped us, Samuel Harper. Now we must help you." The words settled in Samuel's mind, though he couldn't fully grasp their meaning. What did Takakota mean by helping him? He had never asked for anything. He was just a simple rancher. Takakota gestured toward the gathering warriors. "You have earned a place among us," he continued. "You are now part of the tribe, in spirit if not by blood. You will be called upon when we need you." Samuel stood still, the weight of Takakota's words sinking in. He had always been a solitary man, choosing to live alone in the desert, far from the chaos of civilization. Now, it seemed he had a responsibility to these people, a bond he hadn't asked for but could no longer deny. "I'm not one of you," Samuel said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Takakota's eyes met his, steady and unwavering. "You are more than what you believe, Samuel. The kindness you have shown is the thread that binds us. You are now part of the Apache people." Samuel's heart pounded as he processed the words. He had spent his life working the land, caring for his cattle, and never once imagining that he would become entangled in the world of the Apache. Yet here he was, standing before their chief, being told that he had become part of something much larger than himself. Takakota stepped closer, his voice lowering. "There is much you need to learn, Samuel. But you will be taught the ways of the Apache. We will make you one of us." Samuel couldn't speak. What could he say? He had done nothing more than offer a woman water, and now he was being told that his life had a new purpose. Takakota seemed to read his thoughts. "You may not understand now, but in time, you will," he said. "Your actions have proven your heart, and that is enough for us." As Takakota walked away, Samuel stood frozen in place. His ranch, once a quiet and solitary haven, now felt like a place of great responsibility. The Apache warriors had surrounded his home, but it wasn't just their numbers that made him feel small. It was the weight of their trust, their belief in him, that made everything feel heavier. That night, as he lay in bed, Samuel found it hard to sleep. The sounds of the warriors' campfires, the rhythm of their drums, filled the air around him, but his mind was too restless. He had always been a man of few words, preferring the quiet solitude of his land to the company of others. But now, he was caught between two worlds, the world of the Apache and his own. As the days passed, Samuel spent more time with Takakota and Ayanna, learning the ways of the tribe. They taught him their traditions, their language, and the ways they had survived the harsh conditions of the desert. Samuel couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for these people, who had lived through so much and yet still honored their customs with unwavering devotion. He still didn't fully understand why he had been chosen, but he couldn't deny the bond that was forming between him and the Apache. He was no longer just a rancher, but a part of something far greater than himself. As the days passed, Samuel Harper began to adjust to his new reality. The Apache tribe, with their strong presence and unwavering discipline, had become a constant in his life. They were always there, but never intrusive, always watching, always waiting. Samuel couldn't help but feel both humbled and overwhelmed. He was no longer just a rancher. He was part of something much greater. His land, his quiet little ranch, was now a place of importance, a place that carried the weight of an ancient bond. Ayanna, the giant Apache woman who had become his closest ally, seemed to be everywhere. She was there during the day, helping him with tasks around the ranch, teaching him more about the ways of the Apache people. She was patient with him, guiding him through the rituals and traditions that had been passed down through generations. She was more than just a warrior. She was a symbol of everything Samuel had come to respect about the Apache. She was strong, yet kind, fierce, yet gentle. As the days wore on, Samuel found himself growing closer to her. There were moments when their eyes would meet, and he would see something unspoken in her gaze. It was a connection, one that neither of them had expected, but one that had grown naturally as they spent more time together. But despite their growing bond, there was always a sense of distance, a wall that Samuel couldn't quite understand. She had been through so much, and there was something in her past that she hadn't yet shared with him. It wasn't that she was unwilling to talk. It was that there were things buried deep within her that words could never fully express. One evening, after a long day of working the ranch, Samuel found himself sitting on the porch, looking out at the vast desert horizon. The sun had just dipped below the mountains, and the sky was a brilliant orange, casting long shadows across the land. Ayanna came to sit beside him, her figure silhouetted against the fading light. For a while, neither of them spoke. Samuel had learned to appreciate the silence, to let the moments stretch out without the need for words. "You've been quiet lately," Ayanna said softly, breaking the silence. "Is something bothering you?" Samuel hesitated. He had always been a man of few words, but with Ayanna, it was different. There was a comfort in her presence, a feeling of safety that allowed him to let his guard down, even if only for a moment. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," he said finally, his voice low. "I've lived my life alone, and now I'm part of something I don't fully understand." Ayanna looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You are part of us now," she said simply. "You have been chosen, Samuel. Not by chance, but by your actions. You have proven yourself." Samuel shook his head, still unsure. "I didn't do anything special. I just helped you. Gave you water." "Water," Ayanna repeated, her voice tinged with a quiet emotion. "You gave me more than just water. You gave me hope, and that is something not everyone can offer." Samuel's heart tightened at her words. He had never thought of his actions as anything more than the right thing to do. But hearing her speak of them in such a way made him realize that he had done something far more significant than he had ever intended. "You will learn in time," Ayanna continued. "Your place here is not just because of your kindness, but because you have the heart of a warrior. You will stand with us when the time comes." Samuel turned to her, his brow furrowed in confusion. "A warrior?" he asked. "I'm no warrior." Ayanna smiled softly. "You are more than you know." Over the next few days, Samuel spent more time with the Apache warriors, learning from them, understanding their ways. Takakota, the tribe's chief, took him under his wing, teaching him the history of the Apache people, their struggles, and their triumphs. Samuel listened, absorbed the stories, and slowly began to understand the depth of their culture. He saw in the Apache warriors a sense of honor and loyalty that was rare in the world he had known. The Apache people had faced incredible hardships, yet they remained strong, bound together by an unbreakable bond. Samuel began to feel a sense of pride, a sense of belonging, as he realized that the Apache had accepted him not just as a friend, but as one of their own. It was then that Takakota gave him a task, one that would change his life even more. "We must prepare," the chief said, his voice serious. "There are those who would seek to take what is ours. We must defend what we have fought for." Samuel knew that Takakota was speaking of the land, the home that Samuel had fought so hard to protect. But now, the stakes were much higher. It wasn't just his ranch at risk, it was the future of the Apache people. Samuel's heart raced as Takakota's words sank in. He had been living in a world of quiet solitude, but now, he was part of a much larger struggle. His place among the Apache was no longer just a matter of kindness. It was a matter of survival. And Samuel knew that when the time came, he would stand beside them as one of their own. Samuel stood at the edge of his ranch, the wind stirring the dry dust beneath his boots, as Takakota's words lingered in his mind. "We must prepare," the chief had said, his voice deep and unwavering. "There are those who would seek to take what is ours." Samuel wasn't just facing the challenge of defending his own land now. He was standing on the precipice of something much bigger. The Apache people, who had welcomed him as one of their own, were preparing for a confrontation, and Samuel, a man who had spent most of his life alone, found himself swept into their struggle. As the sun dipped low in the sky, a sense of urgency began to settle over the camp. The warriors gathered around their fires, sharpening their weapons, preparing themselves for whatever was coming. Samuel joined them, his heart pounding in his chest as he realized just how far he had come from his quiet life. The Apache had trained him, shown him their ways, and now, it was time for him to stand beside them. As the days passed, Samuel found himself growing stronger, more confident in his place among the tribe. Ayana, ever the strong and steady presence, continued to guide him. She had become more than just a fellow warrior. She was his closest ally, and perhaps even something more. Their bond had deepened over the past few weeks, forged not just in shared struggle, but in an unspoken understanding. She saw in him the same strength that the tribe had recognized, a strength that wasn't defined by his past, but by his actions. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Ayana turned to Samuel, her face serious. "The time is coming," she said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "We will defend our land, and you will be with us." Samuel nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "I'm ready," he said, though he wasn't sure if he truly was. He had never been a fighter, not in the way that the Apache were. But something inside him had shifted. He had learned from them, and now, he understood the importance of standing together. "It's not just about fighting," Ayana continued, her voice softening. "It's about protecting what is ours, what we have worked for. It's about honor." Samuel absorbed her words, feeling the weight of them settle in his chest. He had always believed in honor, but now he understood it on a deeper level. It wasn't just about personal integrity. It was about a way of life, a way of being that connected everyone in this camp, everyone who stood beside him. The night before the battle, Samuel lay awake in his small cabin, staring up at the ceiling. The sound of warriors preparing echoed through the camp, the low murmurs of voices and the clinking of armor. Outside, the stars shone brightly above, a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a fight to defend his land. This was a fight for something deeper, something that would shape the future of the Apache people and his own future. The next morning, the warriors gathered, their faces stoic and determined. Takakota stood before them, his presence commanding the attention of every warrior in the camp. "Today, we fight for our land, for our people, and for our future," he said, his voice carrying across the group. "We will stand together as one. No one will take from us what is rightfully ours." Samuel stood among them, his heart racing but his resolve firm. The fight ahead would be difficult, but he knew one thing for certain. He was no longer alone. As they rode out to face the approaching enemy, Samuel felt the weight of the moment. The sun had risen high in the sky, and the desert stretched out before them, silent and still. The warriors rode with a quiet determination, their eyes fixed on the horizon. Samuel had never ridden with such a sense of purpose. This wasn't just about protecting his ranch anymore. This was about defending everything that the Apache people stood for. The battle that followed was fierce and unforgiving. Samuel fought alongside the Apache warriors, the weight of his newly forged identity heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer the lone rancher of the desert. He was a part of something much larger, something that bound him to these people and their way of life. The sounds of battle rang out across the desert, the clash of metal and the cries of warriors filling the air. Samuel fought with everything he had, each strike a reflection of the lessons he had learned from the Apache. He had never imagined that his life would lead him here, but now that he was in the midst of it, he knew there was no turning back. As the battle raged on, Samuel could see the warriors around him moving with an almost supernatural grace. They were like a single unit, each one in tune with the others, working together as if they had been doing so for a lifetime. Samuel was beginning to understand the depth of their bond, the way that each warrior fought not just for themselves, but for the tribe as a whole. It was a way of life, a code of honor that transcended individual desires. As the enemy began to retreat, the Apache warriors stood victorious. Samuel, covered in dust and sweat, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. But there was also a sense of pride, of knowing that he had fought for something greater than himself. As he looked around at the warriors, their faces tired but triumphant, he realized that this was just the beginning. The battle had been won, but the fight for the Apache way of life would continue. And Samuel Harper, once a lone rancher, was now an integral part of that fight. The days after the battle were quiet, but Samuel Harper could feel the weight of the victory heavy on his shoulders. The Apache warriors had stood their ground, and the enemy had retreated, their pride shattered. Samuel, though exhausted, was not one to rest on his laurels. He had never expected to be part of a battle like this. But now that it was over, the silence that followed was almost deafening. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something more. Samuel stood at the edge of his ranch, his eyes scanning the vast desert that stretched out before him. The horizon was endless, the colors of the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The Apache warriors had packed up their camp, but they were not leaving. Instead, they were staying, as promised, to watch over him, to ensure that no harm would come to him or his land. Samuel had been accepted into their fold, not by blood, but by the actions he had taken. He had proven himself, not only as a man of honor, but as someone worthy of their trust. As he walked back to the cabin, Ayanna met him at the door, her face soft but resolute. "You fought well," she said, her voice steady. Samuel nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "It's not over yet," he said. "There's more to come." Ayanna's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was an unspoken understanding between them. The battle had been won, but it was clear that the war for the Apache people's survival was far from over. The world around them was changing, and the Apache were ready to fight for what was theirs. "You're one of us now," Ayanna said, her voice firm but kind. "You will stand with us, and we will stand with you." Samuel didn't respond right away. He had heard these words before, but now, they carried a weight that he couldn't ignore. He had already chosen his path, but there was no turning back now. He was part of something much larger than himself, something that would shape the future in ways he couldn't yet understand. "I'm ready," he said finally, his voice steady. Ayanna nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Good," she said, "because we need you." The days that followed were filled with preparations. The Apache warriors continued their training, sharpening their skills, preparing for whatever challenges lay ahead. Samuel worked alongside them, learning their ways, growing stronger in both mind and body. He wasn't just learning how to fight. He was learning how to be part of a people, how to live with honor and respect, how to fight for something greater than himself. The Apache were a people of tradition, of deep-rooted values, and Samuel found himself embracing their way of life more than he ever thought possible. He had spent years living alone, working the land, but now, he was part of a family, a tribe that saw him not just as an outsider, but as one of their own. One evening, as Samuel sat around the campfire with Ayanna and Takakota, the chief, the mood was somber. The warriors were silent, their faces lit by the flickering flames, their eyes reflecting the fire's glow. Takakota's voice broke the silence. "We've received word," he said, his voice low and steady. "There are more threats. Our enemies will not stop, and we must be ready." Samuel listened intently, the weight of Takakota's words settling over him. He had known that their struggle wasn't over, but hearing the chief speak of it so plainly made the reality of their situation even clearer. "We will defend our land," Takakota continued, "and we will fight with everything we have. But we need more than just warriors. We need unity. We need strength in numbers." Samuel felt a fire spark within him. He had seen what the Apache were capable of, and he knew that they were a force to be reckoned with. But they couldn't do it alone. It was time for him to step up, to become more than just a passive observer. "I'll stand with you," he said, his voice strong and clear. "I've learned from you, and I know what's at stake. I'm ready to fight for what's ours." Takakota nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet approval. "We knew you were one of us," he said simply. The days turned into weeks, and the Apache warriors, along with Samuel, continued their preparations. They practiced their skills, honed their strategy, and formed a bond that was stronger than steel. Samuel found himself growing into a new role, one that he had never imagined for himself. He was no longer just a rancher. He was a warrior, fighting for the survival of a people who had shown him more honor and respect than he had ever known. The morning of the battle arrived sooner than anyone expected. The warriors gathered, their faces set with determination, their spirits unbroken. Samuel stood with them, his heart racing but his mind focused. They had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to act. As the enemy approached, the air grew heavy with anticipation. Samuel could feel the tension building in the camp, the quiet before the storm. He knew that this battle would be different from the last. This time, they were fighting not just for land, but for their very way of life. And Samuel Harper, once a lone rancher in the desert, was ready to fight alongside the Apache to ensure that the future would be theirs. The sun hung low in the sky as Samuel Harper and the Apache warriors took their positions. The wind had died down, leaving the air thick with anticipation. Samuel could feel the weight of the moment settling over him, a moment he had never imagined when he first arrived at his quiet ranch. Now, standing alongside the Apache, he was no longer just an outsider, a rancher trying to protect his land. He was part of something far greater, a tribe that had accepted him as one of their own. The enemy was closing in, and Samuel's heart raced. But there was no fear, only a sense of purpose. They had come together for this moment, and together, they would face whatever was to come. Takakota stood at the front of the warriors, his presence commanding and strong, his face set in a determined expression. The battle was not just about defending their land. It was about defending their way of life, their traditions, and their people. Samuel had learned this over the past weeks, had come to understand what the Apache stood for, and now, he would stand with them as one. Ayanna was close by, her eyes scanning the horizon, every muscle in her body coiled and ready for action. She had become not just a warrior, but a guide for Samuel, showing him the true meaning of honor, strength, and loyalty. Their bond had grown, not just from necessity, but from mutual respect. She had taught him how to fight not just with strength, but with heart. The enemy finally appeared on the horizon, a group of men who had long coveted the land of the Apache, seeking to claim it for themselves. The sight of them made Samuel's blood boil, but he kept his focus, knowing that this was the moment. Takakota raised his hand, signaling the warriors to prepare. Samuel gripped his weapon tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. This was not just a battle for survival, but for everything he had come to care about. The enemy approached, their movements slow but deliberate. They had underestimated the Apache, just as many others had before. Samuel could feel the tension building, the quiet moments stretching into eternity before the first arrow was loosed. Then, with a sharp cry from Takakota, the battle began. Arrows flew through the air, warriors clashing in a frenzy of motion, each side determined to emerge victorious. Samuel was no stranger to hard work, but this was different. This was a fight for something that could not be measured in land or cattle. It was a fight for honor, for family, for a future. Samuel fought with everything he had, his mind clear, his movements swift and precise. He had learned from the best, and now it was his turn to prove himself. As the battle raged on, he could see the Apache warriors fighting with a ferocity and unity that took his breath away. They were one, each movement in sync with the other, like the beat of a single heart. Samuel fought alongside Ayanna, their strength and determination a testament to the bond they had formed. There were moments when their eyes met across the battlefield, and in those moments, they knew what the other was thinking. They were a team, and together, they would protect what they had come to love. As the enemy began to retreat, Takakota's voice rang out, calling for the warriors to push forward. The Apache were relentless, their pursuit unyielding. Samuel was right there with them, his legs burning with exhaustion, but his resolve stronger than ever. They fought for their home, for their future, and for the respect that they had earned. When the dust finally settled, the battlefield was silent, save for the sounds of warriors tending to the wounded and gathering their fallen. Samuel stood among them, covered in dirt and blood, his body aching, but his heart full of pride. They had won. The land was safe, and the Apache had proven once again that they would never back down from a fight. As Samuel looked around at the warriors, he realized that he was no longer just a visitor in their world. He was one of them, bound by the same honor, the same loyalty, and the same commitment to the land they called home. Takakota approached Samuel, his expression one of quiet respect. "You fought well," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You are one of us now." Samuel nodded, his chest swelling with emotion. "I'm proud to stand with you," he said, his voice steady. Ayana stepped forward, her eyes meeting his. "We knew you had it in you," she said, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Samuel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. He had come a long way from the man who had lived alone on his ranch, unsure of his place in the world. Now, he was part of a people who had shown him more than he ever could have imagined. The fight was over for now, but Samuel knew this was only the beginning. The Apache had their land, and with Samuel's help, they would continue to protect it. But there were more battles ahead, more challenges to face. Samuel was ready for them, knowing that he would stand with the Apache, fighting for everything that they had worked for and everything that he had come to believe in.